What's going on, guys? MariK here, back with episode 6 of our History of the Dragon Ball Super card game mini-series. We're here to do Colossal Warfare this time around. This set was pretty crazy as far as the competitive meta went. We got a lot of power cards in this set, a lot of really good and really abusable archetypes as well, and kind of put the meta in a really awkward spot to where you were either running these decks or you just weren't winning against them. And so there was a lot of mirror matches, a lot of similar decks in Top Cut. Even like side decks were almost identical card for card. Shy of a few things here and there, people decided to tech in for their own personal little identity for the deck. But this set also had some of my personal favorites and some of the coolest archetypes that I think we had seen in the game up till this point. Red brought continued support for the Dragon Ball GT archetypes and brought one of everybody's favorite villains, the evil little parasitic baby monster, which actually turned out to be one of the most fun archetypes to play. It does have its downsides, unfortunately, and we haven't really gotten any support for the deck to get around those negative aspects, but the deck's still a lot of fun to play. So starting off with the baby archetype, unfortunately, the leader had set 3 syndrome. He's only got the attack leader draw a card, but his awakened side was really cool. Every time that he attacked, you got to choose a battle card and decrease its battle power for the duration of the turn, which resulted in a good number of KOs or just being able to power over some of your opponent's battle cards. The leader at the time was pretty fantastic for the deck. Of course, we ended up getting the baby Vegeta leader a little bit later on in the draft box too. That was just so much better and made this leader completely irrelevant. But we got so much support for this deck that it was just one of the best decks that you could play coming out of set 4. With the overwhelming number of good support for the baby archetype, this deck had the potential to be one of the top meta decks. The only problem this deck had was barrier, and they got zero support for getting around barrier effects. Now, granted, we do get some battle cards and some extra cards here and there that get around barrier, and others that just allow you to attack active battle cards, but the majority of the cards just need to be able to get around barrier, and it's not so much getting around barrier that's the problem, it's the fact that the support that it has doesn't get around barrier. And you've got everything from the 1-drop that lets you absorb a card on the battlefield, and of course you could do it with Vegeta since all of these evolved from Vegeta, but you would also could just do it with Baby. So you could play 2 of the 1-drop babies and very easily get out the 4-drop, who comes out and targets anything without barrier. Minus 20,000 is guaranteed to almost KO everything that's going to be played that early. And the 6-drop Great Ape Baby is even more insane, how it can just KO almost anything as soon as it hits the board or severely hinder it. And that's also when he attacks as well. So just a really powerful card to have on the board. And both the extra cards were phenomenal as well. You got Vow Revenge that had cost 0 energy and just minus 15,000 from anything. So it's a free KO on lower cost cards, and if the higher cost cards are in rest mode, it almost guaranteed they were going to get KO'd. Then you had Revenge Death Ball, which is easily the best card in the entire archetype. It's an activate battle for the leader that gave minus 15 to one of your opponent's battle cards and gave plus 10 to yours. And it was such a powerful card to be able to play. And since it was Activate Battle, it triggered before combos. So, as soon as you played this card, no matter how many cards your opponent comboed with, if it hit 0 because of the minus 15, they were automatically dead. It didn't matter what all they played after that. We also got another Goku GT leader, and this one was not any better than the one we got in the starter deck from set 3. It was still just a really bland card. I mean, you drew a card if you had 4 or less in your hand. You had to draw 1 more and you gained 5,000 power. Like, it was a leader that kind of relied on you to have no card advantage over your opponent, and it did nothing else to benefit that. Like, you have to draw an extra card, but if your hand is 4 or less when you get to draw that extra card, that's not making up for anything. You could just play a different leader, keep your card advantage, and still have more cards than this leader would give you. So you were still better off running older red leaders like the Majin Vegeta or the Soul Unleashed Goku, or of course Pan. Pan was probably the best red leader at the time, maybe besides Vegeta. Now, while the leader itself was kind of garbage, it did get some really decent support, especially in Triple Flash, Super Saiyan 4 Son Goku. Easily one of the best looking cards in the game, especially for Super Saiyan 4 cards. You got to EX Evolve him for just one energy. You didn't have to discard anything. You had to draw 2 cards when you did play him. He had Deflect, he had Triple Strike, he had so many great things. And then he had the ability to be immune to counter cards if he was 40,000 or more power. Not hard to do at all with this archetype. Now, they did change it to where you had to have a red Saiyan leader, but bam, you could just have the Pan leader, who's going to boost him anyways. And there was just easy support to be able to do that. Especially, you could use the Pan from the Dash Pack from set 3 along with the leader. So, as soon as you play Triple Flash, he gets a 5,000 boost from the leader. You play that Dash Pack Pan combination attack, I think it's called. And then bam, he's at 40,000. 40,000 Triple Strike, they can't counter it. You just dump your whole hand into combos. Bam, you win the game. Like, it was just an insanely powerful card. Then you had Untapped Power Super Saiyan 3 Son Goku, who was a 5 cost, so he was a target to EX Evolve Triple Flash onto. And he did have Deflect as well, but I don't know, he just felt kind of lackluster. You played him, you got to draw a card, and you could choose an energy and switch it to active mode, which was not terrible, because you could play him for 5 energy, then you would get your 1 energy back to be able to EX Evolve the Triple Flash. But there was just easier ways to get around that, especially with the 3-drop GT Goku, that when your life was low enough, he became a 5-drop on the board. So it was just easier to get out Triple Flash without having to waste all of your energy on cards like Untapped Power Super Saiyan 3. I would personally say Triple Flash is still one of the most powerful cards, and one of the more underrated cards too, I believe. I think that if the Goku GT engine could just get a little bit more support that helped lead up to Triple Flash, I think he would be a fantastic contender to be able to be competitive and stand up against the more dominant decks in the format. Now, Red didn't get much generic support in Set 4, but we did get the Intensifying Power Trunks, who was basically a better version of the Set 1 Kaba. Gained 10,000 power, gained critical. He was a 1-drop GT Trunks. So, of course, he was the ideal evolution target for Chain Attack Trunks, who was abused in every red deck, along with the 7-drop Zeno from Union Force. And so this card was highly abused, especially around this time, and even now people still use it in red decks to be able to play that Chain Attack for super cheap. Definitely a fantastic card. A lot of support for GT, and you could even get it out with the Grand Tour Spaceship if you needed to, but for 1 energy, you could just hard cast it, swing with it, and then you could even evolve. So you get that extra card from your life, and get the critical damage, and still get the Chain Attack ability off. In fact, Chain Attack Trunks and the Blue Zeno are still one of the more discussed, we'll call it a discussion, combos in the game on whether or not it needs to stay in the game. I personally don't think it should. I think Chain Attack should have had a restriction on him anyways. If you're hardcasting the Zeno for 7 and getting the ability, by all means, you've earned it. But if you're playing it because you played a 2-drop evolution combo and then just being able to wipe your opponent's board and hand that easily and then still have energy to be able to play your cards, that's a bit over the top. Now, when it comes to the blue archetypes in Set 4, there's a bit of debate as to whether or not any of it was actually relevant. There were a few cards that did see some play, but the archetypes itself were not really... Nobody really gave a shit about them. It was more the fact that certain cards in the archetypes could be extremely abused with other decks, and while it is creative to see people do that, when everybody is playing the same thing, it becomes really stale really fast. The biggest contender in blue was the evil monster Hirudegarn from one of the movies, I think movie 13, I believe, who the archetype was not really played at all, but this leader was highly abused because of his ability to choose a battle card in your hand, and you could just drop it, and then you get to draw 2 cards. And honestly, that side was actually better than the Awakened side. When you were Awakened, if your opponent had 4 or more, or if you had 4 or more energy, you made your opponent place one of their cards on top of their deck. I mean, you did get rid of a card in their hand, but for the most part, more people just loved the fact that they could just drop a card and draw 2 cards. And this leader was, if your deck didn't require anything in particular, you could run this, and it gave you a fantastic leader. Not to mention, at that time, Unyielding Spirit Trunks was still at 4, so you had Unyielding Spirit Trunks, plus you had Sensu Bean for energy manipulation, and it just got really crazy and really out of hand. The Hirudegarn archetype did have a lot of support, although more people were interested in just a few of them, specifically Hoi, the super combo, that allowed you to also drop a card and draw 2 cards as well. So you had that plus the leader's ability that just allowed you just all this draw power and cycling through your deck, and you were filling up your drop to just be able to guaranteed have overwhelm cards, and it gave you a lot of draw power and a lot of options early on. Phantom Flame Cannon was a card that some people played initially. I think it started to see less and less play as the format went on, but it wasn't a bad card to be able to make your opponent get rid of cards. As for the 7 and the 9 drops, they weren't really ever played because nobody played Hirudegarn for Hirudegarn. They played him for the support and for the ridiculous super combo. On the other side, you had Iron Vow Trunks. This was a leader that a lot of people tried to make work, and not that it didn't work out well, but it just seemed like it was a weaker version of Soul Striker. At the end of your turn, if all your energy was blue, you get to choose one and switch it to active mode. But again, Soul Striker, especially Awakened, got 2 instead of 1. Your energy had to be blue anyways, so it just seemed like Soul Striker was the better option to go with. I don't know. I don't feel like this leader was worth playing. I'm not really sure why some people wanted to play the Trunks over the Soul Striker anyways. But that's a here or there. I guess it's just a preference. But to me, it just felt like a weaker Soul Striker. As far as support went, there wasn't really a lot of support that went with this leader. We did get a couple fantastic blue cards, one of them being At All Costs Vegeta, which was probably the biggest powerhouse from blue for the set. You got to give him Triple Strike. He gained a ridiculous amount of power. You got the KO cards. Overall, it was a really fantastic card. He could also give you crit yourself, so you could add cards to your hand and awaken when you needed to, if you weren't already. And it was an exploitable card in a lot of decks. And then you had cards like Raging Energy Blast Gotenks, who were it was really cool stuff, because you could attack with him, get the critical damage, and you could pop him off, search your deck, get a Goten and Trunks, and then also reset 2 of your energy. Wasn't really that big a deal. Still isn't a big deal, but I enjoy using this card with the newer blue Gotenk stuff that we get in a later set, and just all the energy manipulation and stuff that you can do with it. And Gotenk's having a lot of support. He's got support in red, green, and blue, and we've even got, I think we might even have some yellow Goten and Trunks by now, but you could just have a multicolored Gotenks deck, and there's support for each color to support it. Like red, blue didn't have really any generic support that you could run, but we did get the legendary flute, which initially was just a really good card, and everybody was just kind of wanted to play it. It wasn't really until later on that it was proven to be a bit more abusable. Now, your leader did have to be blue, but you could run it with any leader. It had 0 cost. You could bounce your own cards and draw a card. And so it was very easy to take advantage of the card. Now, I liked using it against the opponent, and occasionally it was worth it. But even I have to admit, I am guilty of abusing this card. I ran 4 of them in a Future Trunks deck, and running them and playing the free blocker, and then bouncing the free blocker back, and you could draw a card, you play it again, and you could just kind of loop it. And it was just silly shenanigans, but the card became such a problem that it actually hit the ban list. And actually, I believe it got limited to one. I believe it was limited to one at first, and then they just kind of straight up were like, you know what, whatever, ban it, we're done with it, get it out. So I'm not, I don't know, I don't feel like it was a ridiculous card, because you could only bounce your opponent's cards with 3 or less, so it's not like you could, get anything off the board for free, but I definitely do understand why Flute was such an abusable card, and it wasn't about bouncing your opponent's stuff, it was definitely about bouncing your own cards. And there was a lot of decks at the time, especially blue and blue-yellow variants, that could just take such good advantage of this card, and that's why it became a target to Bandai themselves. With green, we finally got our favorite green spacemen, the Namekians. This was all kinds of support around Piccolo, Nail, King Piccolo, just all the cool Namekian characters that we had, and even some that we didn't like Lord Slug. But being able to get Piccolo support finally was nice. We were just kind of getting cards here and there, but we weren't actually getting Namekian archetypes. And while the archetype didn't actually do anything competitive-wise, it was definitely a lot of fun to play, and I did enjoy, taking a few tournaments with it as well. With Set 4, Bandai introduced another new skill, this one being called Bond, which, based on the number of battle cards in the archetype that you had in play, you got certain abilities. Unfortunately, Piccolo also got the Set 3 treatment as well, and had a pretty shitty Unawakened side. Now, what was really nice about this leader, though, is that he was Namekian, he was God, and he was Universe 7. So there was a lot of support that you could play for any of those 3 traits. And Bond wasn't too bad for him. You just had to have another Namekian in play. And he got critical. So having a leader with critical was nice, especially with the support that he got. But also when he attacked, you got to boost another Namekian card as well. So it benefited you to actually have more than just have him on the board. You have the Namekian support too, and that way both cards got a boost, and you could hopefully do a little bit more damage with them. Piccolo also got a fantastic amount of support, ranging from Kami's Power Piccolo that had Barrier and Double Strike and had a once per turn auto for Bond 2 that didn't even care what the other card was. It didn't even have to be a Namekian, and let you get a free KO. And you didn't even have to attack with him. He could sit there with Barrier, and you could just once per turn KO stuff every turn. You had some cool King Piccolo support. Now, the King Piccolo support wasn't really... They tried to have like a mini archetype in the set, but it was mostly based around the actual Namekians. So King Piccolo is still kind of lacking as far as being able to build an actual playable deck with him. But we do have a few good King Piccolo cards, and you can kind of work your way around it. It's just not as consistent as running like the actual Namekians. And then Piccolo got his own Activate Battle card as well. Gives him a boost, and also makes your opponent discard a card. So it was kind of cool because they'd have to discard a card, and then if you were doing that damage with the leader, and you got the crit damage, that was another card that they were going to lose. We also got Sacrifice, which was a fantastic negate. That instead if your leader was a Namekian, instead of having to pay the energy, you could just pay 1 card from your life. So not only did it help you awaken, but you could use it without having open energy, and you got a card from your life so that you could have that extra card to replace the negate that you just lost. The field card was, it was kind of a toss-up. Not only did you get nothing for playing it, which was really trashy, because turn 1 you're going to play it and then just pass because there's nothing else you can do. Unless you went second, you could attack with the leader and draw a card. So that was really shitty, considering a lot of the fields get an effect, at least when they're played. Now, the Activate main was interesting. 1 green energy, you had to discard a card to be able to activate the ability. And you have to look at the top 5 cards of your deck and choose any 2 or less Namekian and play it. Granted, it wasn't terrible. It could have been a lot better, but I did like the Swarm ability because you could just keep playing little guys and just It was just Namekian Weenie Rush, and that's how I did as well as I did in a few of the tournaments I played in. Hell, we even beat Universe 7 Victory Strike Frieza with this deck, just because being able to spit out so many little pickle men and just, kind of poke and prod your opponent over and over and over again, eventually they have to start defending their life. They also have to make sure they don't awaken because they want to save that awaken for being able to play the Goku and then being able to EX Evolve and drop Victory Strike. So when you're sitting there and just swinging at them with all these little dudes, they have to start using up their resources. They have to combo from their hand, and they can only let you take so much damage from them too. So the deck had its merits, but some of the support just wasn't enough to make it high tier. I think with a little bit of support, Namekians could be a really powerful deck, and I haven't revisited it in a moment, but I kind of feel like I need to, just to see if there's anything new we can do with it with some of the newer support. Then we had one of my least favorite leaders and decks to play against. It's Lord Slug Gigantified. This leader was annoying just because no matter what, it's just a pain in the ass to deal with. Like, it's not that it's not beatable, it's really annoying to play. It's kind of like the feeling of playing against Cell, except you kind of feel it every turn. On the Unawakened side, he had the same ability as like the Crit Vegeta from set 1. You added a card from your life to your hand, he gained critical, so they could awaken themselves at any time. Luckily, he was a draw 2 card instead of a untap 2. Could have been a pain in the ass. And then, on the other side, instead of giving himself critical, once per turn, you dropped a card, and you made your opponent drop a card. Now, with the support for Lord Slug, that's a pain in the ass to deal with. Especially because he could just use it at any time because it isn't activate main. And a lot of the Lord Slug support was annoying as well. We did get more support for it as of recently, and it makes it more annoying to play against. It's not anything that's top tier, but sometimes when you're just playing fun decks, it's really kind of a hassle to try and deal with when they're just making you drop cards out of your hand one at a time, 2 or 3 at a turn. While the deck did have good support, one of the reasons it didn't really stand up in the competitive environment is because it was just a slower deck. Now, like, you had the 2-drop slug that lets you search your deck to get one. Then you had the 3-drop Anguilla. I hate him. It's one of my most hated cards just because he has Bond 2. He gets to make you discard a card when he attacks. It's got critical as well, so you're losing 2 cards for it. It's just a pain in the ass card. Then you've got the 4-drop that brings out another card. And the 6-drop EX Evolve is even worse because it makes you discard a bunch. And having to discard and then deal with all the other discard in the deck, you run out of cards fast. Like I said, if you can run a deck that can keep up with it, either in resources or card advantage, it's not a problem. If you can keep the stuff off the board, it's not a problem either. It's just kind of an annoyance to have to slowly be discarding your cards one by one. At least with Cell, when your opponent played Cell, you lost all your cards down to 3, but then that was it. Like, there was no more. It was kind of a one and done. Where this is just a repeated, just a slap in the face over and over and over again. And I'm not going to say it's better than Cell, because I still feel Cell is better, because Cell makes you drop everything at once, and you can just go for the kill right then and there. But this is just a, slower, more annoying death. And, I mean, let's face it, who wants to sit and suffer for that long? Green didn't get much support for generic stuff either, but we did get Newfound Power Son Gohan was another one of those crit attackers like the Trunks that we got in this set that went along with the Kaba from set 1. That gave Green a good boost because Green didn't have a lot as far as support goes, and for a while it was one of the most underrated colors if you weren't running Androids or Cell. Now we had this Gohan that you could fit in any green deck, and actually it made Androids a bit better too because you could easily have yourself awakened by turn 2 and start getting the draws on your leader's ability. On the other side, you had Combo Killer Annie Laza, who was actually from the Tournament of Power. He had barrier and double strike, but once per turn when your opponent comboed, they had to choose a card in their hand and place it in the drop. Now, it's only one, but one is enough. One is enough to be a deterrent, and it's just, again, having barrier, he was just a pain in the ass. This card actually saw a lot of play sometime during the set 4 meta. People were running blue-green decks, sometimes with Soul Striker, sometimes with, I can't think of what the other, maybe it was Hirudegarn, I can't remember what the other leader was. But it was annoying to have to deal with. And when you combine that with other cards, Laza is just a pain in the ass. It meant that you had to know exactly what you were going to discard, you had to know exactly when to combo. And for the longest, that's why I ran the Overrealm Bardock that was able to attack active battle cards, because it was just one of the easiest ways to get around this guy at the time. Now, as happy as I was to get Namekian support, I was much more ecstatic over this archetype. Yellow gave us the Goku's lineage, and while I'm not a super huge Goku fan, I really did like Goku in the Cell Saga. I liked Goku in the Majin Buu Saga as well, but mostly during the Cell Saga, where he was, and even the Android Saga, he was just, you knew Goku was a goofy idiot, but he really showed that he knew his stuff, and that he was actually brilliant when it came to fighting. So, not only did we have that, but Gohan, I actually enjoyed Goten. I wish Goten could be a little more relevant as far as both as far as both the anime and the card game. And then, of course, we got more Bardock stuff, and one of my favorite Bardock cards to ever be created. This archetype was just so phenomenal and so fun to play, until people started to play it the wrong way. So first up, we had another Bardock leader in Uncontrollable Bardock. This was the third yellow Bardock leader we'd gotten, and honestly, I was not complaining. He had an interesting ability where he got to choose a card in the life and add it to hand, and you could choose a rest card and KO it, 3 or less. And then on the Awaken side, he got the same ability, but it didn't matter what the cost of the card was. The only downside of that is you were pretty much inflicting so much damage on yourself, you couldn't really let any attacks go through. So the leader did have its downside, but God, I just loved having Bardock leaders. Bardock is just one of my favorite characters, and I thought this was a great leader, especially for lineage. Now, the only downside is this was a Draw 2 leader, and so it was the Draft Box Bardock as well that we get. But I really enjoyed being able to play Bardock, just anything in general. Unfortunately, I think the best yellow Bardock is still the the Crossworlds Bardock, just because not only is he an untap 2, but that permanent Sensu ability once per turn is just a really nice ability. But nonetheless, this was a fantastic leader as well. The other yellow leader was Legacy Bearer Son Goku, who's also of the Goku's lineage archetype. He had kind of a polar opposite ability to the Bardock. When you attacked with the leader, you got to drop a card and draw 2 cards, so you could kind of fuel your drop for Overrealm if you wanted to, as well as getting to thin your deck out a little bit and get rid of cards you didn't really need. The Awaken side was just kind of when you drew a card, you got to choose a Goku's lineage in your battle area, and he gained 5,000 power. Like, whoop-de-doo. Compared to the front side, it was just infinitely better. Kind of had a similar effect to, like, her Hirudegarn leader, in that you kind of liked not being awakened, but at the same time, you couldn't really play that way for too much longer before you were forced to awaken. Now, he was a switch to energy leader, so that already kind of gave him a little bit of an upside to Bardock, but hey, I still played the Bardock leader. I just thought it was, I just love Bardock, and the ability wasn't that bad either. So as we go through the Goku's lineage support, we're going to be doing it a bit differently than we do with other archetypes, just because this set of support, it kind of has a linear path that you follow with it, and since it both applies to both leaders, we can just kind of do it in a different fashion. The one-drops that started the Goku's lineage swap chain were Adoptive Father-Son Gohan and Bardock the Progenitor. Obviously, Bardock was infinitely better than Grandpa Gohan, but Grandpa Gohan did have his uses. He was a blocker, which, I mean, for what all that's really worth is not a whole lot. But you could play Grandpa Gohan without having to inflict a damage on your life, like you did with Bardock. Bardock's Take 1 life was not optional, but Bardock was still infinitely better because not only was he a 1-drop 10,000 power, he was our first 1-drop super rare, our first second Bardock super rare, and I personally like this one much better than the Super Saiyan one that we got in Set 3. That's irrelevant, though. But he was also 10,000 power, so you could do some damage with him before swapping, which is part of what made the Bardock card kind of abusable. And just the Goku's lineage set in general got really abused. People ran yellow-blue a lot with it, like I said, with the Hirudegarn leader, with Future Trunks, and just, a few leaders here and there. But as for the archetype, it was fantastic because you could play the 1-drop, you could even attack with the Bardock if you wanted to, then you could activate Swap because it didn't have energy cost for going from 1 to 2, so you could immediately swap to the 2-drop in your hand, and you could start your turn 1 with a 2-drop battle card. For our 2-drops, we had Dependable Dynasty Son Goku and Intrepid Dynasty Son Gohan. Personally, I preferred to play the Gohan, as I think most people did. Now, the Goku had his advantages with the fact that he was 15,000, and he could do a good bit more damage to leader, KO more battle cards. But I liked the Gohan because the Gohan had barrier. So while he was only 10,000 power, for your swap chain, you could just play him after the Grandpa Gohan or the Bardock, and he should survive to be able to make it to your turn 2, where you can then activate his swap for 2 yellow energy and swap to a 3-drop. They both had their benefits, I suppose, but I kind of felt like when I built my Lineage deck, back when Lineage first came out, before all the blue-yellow garbage started cropping up, I ran it with 6 of each drop. So I ran 4 Bardocks, 2 Gohan, two of these 2-drop Gokus, and 4 of the Barrier Gohan. That way I knew that I would always have like a good number of swap targets, but I had to choose which ones I thought was better, and I chose 4 of the Gohans and 2 of the Gokus because the Goku was decent if I wanted to get in there and actually attack something, but more often than not I was just trying to get the swap chain to continue. So the Gohan was better because the barrier was going to protect him from all the effects, especially with Baby being in the same set and running rampant at the time. Yeah, there was just no reason not to run the Barrier Gohan. For our 3-drops, we had 2 of my favorite cards in the set. We had Prodigal Dynasty Son Goten and Indomitable Dynasty Super Saiyan Son Goku. The Goten, you never wanted to play it with Swap. Why would you do that? It was so much better as a free, like, super combo-esque card. When you comboed with it, and on a yellow battle card, it gained an additional 10,000 combo power. So it was 15,000 combo power when they attacked into a yellow battle card. That's pretty insane. So I thought the Goten was fantastic. I ran 4 in pretty much every yellow deck since this set came out. You would never swap to him because why would you do that when you can just combo him from your hand and defend all your cards with ease? He's a really nice card to run if you're running the yellow Deadly Defender Frieza, because it's an additional 15,000 power to protect your Deadly Defender, and since that's the only target they can attack, the Gohan or the Goten puts in a lot of work and forces them to combo a lot more than they normally would to be able to kill it. The Goku, on the other hand, I really love this Goku because it was Android Cell Saga Goku, and this was my favorite iteration of Goku, when he had his, like, perfect Super Saiyan, what do they call it, Mastered Super Saiyan form, at the beginning of the Cell games, and so I really like that. Plus, the art is fantastic on this card, and with the foiling, it's just so beautiful. And again, it's a 3-drop that has barrier, so while you could attack with it, it still gives you another swap card that can protect itself and stick around for the next turn to really get your combo going. For the 4-drops, we actually had 3 different targets, although the Plucky Dynasty Pan was actually your super combo, so it was really freaking stupid to use it as a swap target that way. There was no reason nor any benefit for you to waste your super combo as a swap target. I would rather wait a turn until I drew into one of the 4-drops than waste my time by swapping into the 4-drop Pan when I'm probably going to need it to defend my... battle cards, or my leader. The other two targets being Dynasty Deferred Son Goku and Discover Dynasty's Son Gohan. These were your two ideal targets, and they both had barrier. So basically, they had protection. Once you got to that 4-drop, it was like, okay, we're going to defend ourselves so that we can get out that delicious 5-drop. They both had barrier. The Goku, at the end of the turn, he switched to active mode, so you could attack with him. He would still have barrier and switch to active to be able to be there next turn for you to swap to the 5-drop. The Gohan, on the other hand, was the one I preferred to swap to, because he still had barrier, and you played him with swap, you drew 2 cards. So he's a 20,000 barrier, and if you had the Gotens, he was basically 35 on defense, which served really well. And that extra draw 2 really makes a difference, especially since when you're swapping, you're not losing any card advantage, like you would by evolving or unioning or Patara or anything like that. So the Gohan, I think, was much better than the Goku. Being able to get that 1 extra attack in wasn't a super big thing. And I always had other cards that I could attack with anyways. I still ran the Time Patrol Trunks in the deck when it came out, and maybe even the Mysterious Warrior the Masked Saiyan. So I didn't really need to waste my time attacking with Gohan. And again, even if I decided to do so, I had the Gotens to back him up. Now on to the 5-drops. You had 2 different routes you could take with it, but really only one of them would lead you to the Height of Mastery Son Goku, which was the 8-drop. So you had Deadly Golden Great Ape Son Goku, who you swapped him for another 5-drop for 1 yellow energy. And you couldn't play him from any area unless your leader was a Goku GT. So your leader would have to be the starter deck Goku that we'll go over in just a moment. When you play the card, you have to choose a lineage with an energy cost of 5 or less other than the Great Ape from your deck and add it to your hand. So what I like to do is get him out and then attack with him for 25,000. Use 1 yellow energy to swap for another one in your hand, and then search out a card. You could search out a super combo or whatever else you felt like you needed. Swap him again for another Golden Great Ape, and keep doing it till you get to that last energy, and then finally swap him out for a better 5-drop. Now, with that, I usually chose to go with the starter deck promo, but you could go with Abrupt Breakthrough Son Goku, who had barrier, and that would give you setup for the next turn, but by that strategy, you would just run out of energy, and you wouldn't be able to swap into the 8-drop. So it was kind of more just a cheeky way to abuse the 5-drops and to use one of the starter deck rares. With Abrupt Breakthrough, though, you got to swap to the 8-drop Height of Mastery Son Goku, and you could use his auto when a 5 or higher was removed from your battle area, and you could play him for free. Usually wasn't too terribly necessary. Didn't really do as much as it could have. But still decent, I suppose. But it did give way for you to be able to play Height of Mastery Son Goku, who had Deflect, and just his ability was insane. When you played him as swap, you got to choose 3 of your opponent's battle cards or energy, ignoring barrier, switch them to rest mode. So if they had energy open for negates, you could shut them down. If they had blockers open, ready to stop your attacks, you shut them down, and you just murdered them with Height of Mastery. And with 35,000 power and the triple strike and all the combo power you could throw behind it, it was a fantastic card. I actually pulled the SPR from our case when Set 4 came out, and I really loved playing the card. And it wasn't until later on that the card actually became stupid busted due to the Path to Infinite promo that we got, which I never managed to get a hold of because it's stupid expensive. But nonetheless, it was a fantastic finisher, had great abilities, and it actually gave you something to work for instead of you getting to play some ridiculously OP card turn 2 or 3. The Goku's Lineage archetype also had a great amount of support, most notably Successor of Hope, which was a 0-cost activate main that lets you search for a Goku's Lineage with swap of 5 or less, so that meant you could search out the Pan Super Combo, or you could search out any of your swap pieces to be able to continue your chain. Awesome, awesome card. 0-cost cards really should not have such ridiculous abilities, but I feel like this one was not that terrible. It was pretty balanced. It's basically the same as running like a 46 card deck. instead of running a 50-card deck. Whereas the Legendary Flute was an example of a bad card that should not have cost 0. We also had Instant Transmission, which was a counterattack similar to the Sacrifice counterattack for Namekians, where your leader just had to be Goku's lineage, so you could even use it with Bardock, and you had to choose a card in your life instead of using energy to activate it. Then we had times 10 Kamehameha. This card looks amazing as a foil. I actually need to finish foiling out the rest of this deck now that Lineage has kind of fallen behind on a lot of the cards. Price-wise, that is. It was an activate battle card if your leader was a Goku's lineage with Son Goku in the character name, and it gained plus 15,000 power and double strike. So this one you could not use with Bardock, but you could use it with the Goku from the set, as well as the Goku from the starter deck. With set 4, Black got even more crazy support for Overwhelm decks, and as well as new mechanics and better Overwhelm archetypes. We got Demigra, who was a character from Xenoverse. I'm not too familiar with him. Kind of looks like a weird adaptation of Ganondorf here. And then we got a bunch of other support for Mira. We got more Xeno Bardocks as well as Xeno Trunks. And overall, it just was a lot of extra support for Black decks in general that, honestly, I feel like they desperately needed. Even though Mass Saiyan was one of the more favored decks up until this point, especially for Overrealm, it was the most used leader between it, Trunks, and Mira. Demigra had a lot of really good cards in it. And while Mira did too, Mira actually brought forth one of the best Overrealm cards in the entire game. So the Demigra leader and the Demigra archetype had an interesting play strategy that revolved around effects that allowed you to use your opponent's cards against them. The front side was pretty standard. It allowed you to mill the top 2 cards of your deck, and if they were all black cards, you got to draw 1 card. So it was a mono black deck, and having the untap 2 energy was, well, really just what's best for every leader, if we're being honest. Then he had an ability called Wormhole on the Awakened side, Ghastly Malice Demigra, which basically said that you could use Overrealm or Dark Overrealm twice in a turn. That added a ridiculous amount of versatility, just because you could Overrealm twice, so you could get 2 extra bodies on the board for free instead of 1, or for a very low amount of energy, and get 2... I mean, if you're playing the cards, they must be decent effects at the very least. And then you could also use his once per turn to choose 3 black cards in your warp and put them back in the drop. So that, combined with Wormhole, you could easily Overwhelm twice in a turn with little to no effort at all. Demigra got a pretty fair amount of support as well. He got a 4-drop Dark Control Demon God Demigra, the 7-drop Temporal Darkness Demigra, and the Seasoning Arrow extra card. Let's go with the extra card first. It was an activate battle that gave your Demigra leader 10,000 power, and if it was your turn, your opponent chose a card from their hand and sent it to the warp, and if it was a battle card, you got to combo with it. So they could choose an extra card and pitch it, and you would get nothing, and that card would go to the warp. Or if they didn't want to do that, or they didn't have the option, they could choose any battle card. You would get the combo cost. Even if it was a +1 to combo, you'd get that plus 10,000 regardless. And if the ability was relevant to you, I believe you got the ability as well. However, the card would then go to the drop area of the owner, because it went from warp to combo area, and then would go from combo to the drop area. The 4-drop Demigra is pretty gross because he's a Dark Overrealm, so you got him out for 3, and Dark Overrealm meant that they stayed on the board instead of going to Warp at the end phase like the Overrealm. And when he attacked, you got the same ability. You got to choose a card. You got to make your opponent choose a card in their hand and warp it, and if it was a battle card, you got to combo with it. So right there, that gave you 2 instances of getting to do that to your opponent. The 7-drop just added more fuel to the fire, and with it being another Dark Overrealm, you could play it for 4 energy, and you could also keep it on the board because it was Dark Overrealm. Now, having 7 in your drop wasn't too difficult, especially with the Awakened Leader's ability, but when you played him, you got to choose an opponent's battle card and send it to the warp, and then you got to choose a battle card in your warp, 4 or less, and play it. That brought a huge amount of versatility to different cards as well. Some of them didn't work out too well. It had to be Dark Overrealm for the most part, because a lot of the regular Overrealm cards didn't get their abilities unless they were played with Overrealm. But like the 4-drop Demigra, for example, you could bring him back with a 7-drop, and then he would have his ability all over again, and you would be able to just warp more cards from your opponent's hand. The second Black Mirror leader that we got was Mira, one with Darkness. He was, I guess, more built for like a mono black deck, whereas the set 3 Mira, you needed to have at least yellow or green in the deck to be able to get its abilities off. This one, you just, once per turn, you got to choose a card in your life and added it to your hand, so that helped with your Awakening, and you also got extra 5,000 power, and you got to mill the top 3 cards of your deck. And the Awaken was just a switch to energy to active. I personally liked the one from set 3 better. Simply one, because of the Awakening mechanic, you got to add a card from your Warp back to your hand. Now, in some cases, probably a lot of cases, the Untap 2 was a lot better, but it was just different, getting to add a card back to your hand from your Warp, especially if you got to choose another super combo. Awakened, it wasn't really any different. You chose 3 cards in your Warp and put them in the drop area, and he gained 5,000, so that helped with Overrealm and stuff, but honestly, I feel like Demigra just did a much better job at being able to serve those particular purposes for an Overrealm deck. The support for Mira was much better than the actual leader, though. You got an extra card in Dark Kamehameha that gave him an extra 10,000 power during battle, and you also got to warp an opponent's battle card with an energy cost of 4 or less, so that was really nice. Dark Absorption Mira was one of the best cards for us to see, as far as like an actual Mira type of, archetype. You got to overwhelm it for no energy, as long as you had 3. It had a Union Absorption of 4. And you got to take a Toa from your Warp and place it under him. So it didn't matter if you had a card, if it was in your deck, and you drew into it, or you milled it, because it was from Warp. Which gave you a lot more flexibility in being able to play this card. And then you got to play Mira from your Warp or hand with an energy cost of 7 on top of him. So that's where Mira Creator Absorb came in. You could also overwhelm him for 1 energy if you had 4 or more in your drop. He had Deflect, and he got an additional 5,000 power when he attacked for the duration of the turn for each card in your Warp. Now, if you played him with the Overrealm, or with the Union Absorb of the Dark Absorption Mira, then you also got to discard 3 cards in your opponent's hand. So it was a really good ability, and it was essentially like an alternate version of the Cell, the Perfect Form Cell from Union Force. A lot of people chose to abuse it for its 1-cost Overrealm ability, though, because he was already a high attack power card, and then to be able to turn around and play him for 1 energy and swing at your opponent's leader, you could push for game, especially when you combine that with the Double Strike Champa from Galactic Battle. And then, of course, we got the Supreme Kai from the World Tournament set as well. And Mira Creator Absorb is one of the most popular Overrealm cards to still run in any deck, because it can be ran in any deck and is a fantastic finisher for just about any deck as well. Then you had the Umbral Invitation Toa, which was a really cool card. It was a Dark Overrealm that gave you the ability to take an opponent's battle card with an energy cost of 3 or less. Now, some of them only had the ability to take energy cost of 2 or less. This one gave you 3, and then of course you had the EX Evolve that gave you like 6 or less, I believe. So it was just another card that gave you the ability to take an opponent's battle card, but also since she was Dark Overrealm, she was actually going to stick around to be able to see the fruits of her labor. Set 4 also gave us several generic support cards for Black. We got Gravy in Demigra's Thrall, which basically you comboed with it, and you got to take 2 cards from your Warp and put them back in your drop. We had Burst Energy Super Saiyan Bardock, which I'm sure I've mentioned a couple times in a few of these videos now. Basically, you overwhelmed him for 1 energy. He came out for 10,000 extra power, so 30,000 total, and he could attack active battle cards. Fantastic way to get rid of cards with barrier, cards that your opponent wanted to keep on the board, like the 2-drop stupid-ass Brienne, and just run them over before they actually became a problem. And again, for 1 energy, that wasn't really that bad at all. Then we had Absolute Space Super Saiyan 3 Trunks, who was kind of like a mild version of the Super Saiyan 3 Bardock Xeno from Set 3. The only difference being he did have also had Triple Strike, but when you evolved him, you got to choose one of your energy and switch it to active mode, and you got to warp an opponent's battle card. Just one, though. So while he was similar, but he also didn't have a specific leader color requirement either. So you could run him in any deck, although I still feel like an Overwhelm deck would be better anyway. So in the end, personally, I think the Bardock is much better, but it was really cool to see Xeno Trunks get more support, and the art for this card just is awesome as well. Then we had minus Killy Zone Rip to one of the better cards that we got from this set. It was a 0-cost extra card that you could warp 3 cards in your drop. It was the only card that actually lets you choose, or rather, had you choose a specific number instead of warping the entire drop, making it to where your opponent couldn't play counterplay cards. So cards like Cold Bloodlust, or cards like Crusher Ball, things like that, that would kind of screw with your big play coming out. This was a particularly popular card with Cell decks, especially because it prevented your opponent from being able to stop the Perfect Force Cell from coming out and being able to rip your opponent's hand apart. And of course, it had other abilities, or other benefits as well. A lot of decks used it here and there. Unfortunately, the card is now going to be banned as of this Friday, I believe. It'll be banned with the release of Assault of the Saiyans, and so we won't have that anymore. Then we had Time Control Cronoa, who was one of the biggest, the most popular cards of the set, because it basically said, fuck Shugesh. Granted, Shugesh did need it, for sure, but it's kind of ironic how they went about it. It still, luckily, allowed you to use Shugesh. You still got the plus 10,000 for it. You just didn't get to play a battle card from it. What I didn't like about it is the fact that it came into play, and as soon as it hit the board, and it had deflect, so you couldn't fucking stop it anyways, and it came into play and said, so you're not using your Shugesh ability for the rest of the game. At least give it, like, deflect, give it barrier, make it while it's on the board, like some other cards. I know a lot of people hated Shugesh, and I did too. I really did, just because I used Shugesh when I played, Apes, and a little bit when I played Goku's Lineage, although I used Pan because I could search it out, even though you could do that with Planet Vegeta too, I suppose. I hated Shugesh for the same reasons you all did, and it was just because he could be abused in so many other yellow decks, and it kind of felt like it broke certain archetypes apart the way they weren't supposed to be played. And Shugesh kind of put that in perspective. It almost became Cronoa almost became a card that was side decked in every single deck, and it's like, oh, they're playing a yellow leader, I'm gonna play this. Because even if they weren't playing Shugesh, you played it turn 1, you got to draw a card, and what did you miss? Like, there were certain cards you would want to play on turn 1, but being able to have that guaranteed protection was just ultimately so worth it in the end. Although now, with Shugesh being banned as well, there is no need for anyone to ever play Cronoa for the rest of eternity unless we get another super combo that has a similar effect. Then with the release of Set 4, we got not 1, but 2 secret rares in the set. One of them going to, of course, the Goku's Lineage archetype, because it's Goku. It was easily the most fun archetype of Set 4, let's be real. And Demigra, I guess to kind of flaunt the fact that we had this super evil villain that I'm really not sure what he actually does or accomplishes. I never really played Xenoverse. I did play a little bit of the first one, but yeah, we're not going to get into that. So both of these secret rares were actually phenomenal with their abilities, although Demigra was much more playable, and I feel like he was much more worth the value that he ended up being, because he could be played in so many different decks, and his ability was just absolutely insane. However, if you actually managed to get the Goku Jr. out and get his ability to trigger, it almost guaranteed that you would win the game. So let's go ahead and talk about Distant Descendant Son Goku Jr. first. I really liked this card, the art on the card especially. I liked how you had Super Saiyan Bardock in the back with Super Saiyan Goku, Ultimate Gohan, and then Super Saiyan Goten as well. I mean, I guess you could have had Pan, and maybe you should have had Pan there, but I'm not really sure of the reasoning on that one. With Triple Strike, it was already able to do a good amount of damage, but when it attacked, you got to look up 7 cards from the top of your deck, and you could choose as many Goku's Lineage from them and combo with them. But if you had 5 or more that were different names, you automatically got to crit 2 of your opponent's life. So if they were at 5 life, you could play this card, attack, get the ability, crit them for 2 life, drop them down to 3. Now that the attack has gone through, they're already past their counter window, so even if they awakened and they got their 2 energy, they wouldn't be able to stop your attack. They would literally have to be able to combo out of the entire 40,000 triple strike plus whatever you comboed with. And he was an 8 cost, so instead of going into the Height of Mastery Son Goku, you could go into this Son Goku Jr. instead. Do I think this one was better? No. I feel like Height of Mastery was overall a better card and gave you more control over the match and whether or not you were going to win. However, as I said, if you were able to pull off Distant Descendants' ability and get that extra 2 damage crit, you could easily defeat your opponent without awakening them until the very end of the game, in which case it really wouldn't matter and wouldn't benefit them at all. It didn't get played near as much. I did try it out myself when I pulled it, and I also did see and play against other people who tried it as well. I also had somebody actually play the card on me, get the ability to trigger, crit me for 2 life, but I was able to out-combo the damage, and then kill it on the next turn, and then play, attack for game. It was wild, but definitely a fantastic card. I think it was a more playable card than some of the other secret rares, but it was nowhere near as playable as the Demigra. Beyond Darkness was absolutely insane. You had to Dark Overwhelm him for 5 energy, so once you hit 5 energy, you could drop him, and with him being Dark Overwhelm, it meant he stayed around if he didn't finish you off right then and there. He also had Triple Strike and 40,000. However, when he attacked, your opponent had to reveal the hand and choose 4 battle cards from it and combo with them. So not only did you get to look at their entire hand and see what they had, you could rip away 4 cards, any 4 cards that might do you in. And if they had super combos, you could take them as well. You might not get the power boost, or get the draw, or the ability, or anything like that. But, being able to take their super combos away from them so they couldn't use them, fantastic ability. This card was terrifying, and I absolutely hated seeing my opponent play this card. Pretty much the only thing you could hope for is that you had a counter play to be able to stop it, because even if you were to negate the attack, the auto would still go through and go into pending, and the cards that they looked at and chose would just go to the drop area. It's just absolutely insane the way that ruling worked. So your best bet was Cold Bloodlust or Crusher Ball, just something to stop them from being able to do their shenanigans. Because, like I said, once he attacked, it was pretty much game over at that point. Fantastic card, got put in a lot of decks. Was definitely played a lot with the World Tournament stuff. And it didn't have a leader restriction or anything like that, so you can play it with any deck, any archetype of any color, and that's what makes this one of the most playable secret rares, and I think it will keep it a relevant secret rare for quite some time, and keep its value pretty high as well. Then, as is the case with every set, we of course got the special pack with the Colossal Warfare set, and this one gave us a Demigra promo that went pretty well with the Demigra archetype. Granted, once we got as much support as we did from stuff like the Ultimate Box, the Anniversary Box, and just other promos, it kind of was pushed to the side as far as being an actual, good promo to play, but for the time, it saw a decent bit of play with Demigra decks. Basically, he was not really any different than the 4-drop Dark Overwhelm Demigra we had. The only difference being this one was just Overwhelm, and he only cost 1 energy, but when he attacked, he had the same ability to choose a card from your opponent's hand and combo with it or warp it. Not a terrible card, and it gave you some extra warpage, especially if you were awakened, because then you could play him. You could play 2 of him if you really wanted to, or you could play him and have the 4-drop out, and be able to rip 2 cards from your opponent's hand, along with anything else that you might already have on the board. Then we had 2 of my favorite starter decks of all time with this game. Series 4 definitely had the 2 best starter decks, in my opinion. The most fun to play, maybe not the most competitive, but this did give us some really great support for the Goku's Lineage archetype. And gave us one of my favorite, personally my favorite lineage leader. Even though I love the Bardock leader, I felt like this one just had a much better awakened ability. Unfortunately, he had set 3 syndrome on the front side, but with long odds Super Saiyan 4 Son Goku, he had a permanent that said if your life was less than or equal to your opponent, he gained 5,000 power and critical. So having less life than your opponent was actually not a bad thing with this deck, and it kind of slightly discouraged your opponent from being able to get your life lower than theirs without being able to finish them off, because he did get that power boost and he got the critical. And if you combined him with the 10 times Kamehameha, that would be 35,000 double strike crit damage, and was just super fantastic. This was the leader that I chose to use. Remember that golden grade 8 battle card we talked about just a moment ago? That's the card that I would use with this leader. And you would go from that golden grade 8 leader into my personal favorite 5-drop, the Reborn Might Super Saiyan 4 Son Goku. Once per turn, you got to choose a card in your life and add it to your hand, and you can switch him back to active mode, and if you had 2 or less, he gained triple strike. So when you combine that with the leader's double strike crit damage, that was an ass ton of damage, plus the 1 damage he already inflicted if he attacked the leader directly. I loved playing this card. The art was fantastic, and the foils for the starter rares are just, it's always like top notch, especially compared to a lot of the stuff we see in the actual sets. Not quite as good as promos, but better than just almost everything else, even some of the super rares. This card was so much fun to be able to use to push for game, especially because my favorite strategy was attack with the leader, get that double strike crit damage in, and use the golden grade 8 to play another one, play another one, play another one, and then drop this guy and attack, and then trigger his ability and switch him back and give him triple strike, and then just finish them off with your super combos and just dump everything in your hand to be able to push through with that final triple strike attack. Then we also got 2 other great starter deck promos that came with the deck. We got the Ultimate Potential Super Saiyan 2 Son Gohan, which was another 3-drop, so that way you didn't have to use the Goten. You could use the Barrier Goku or the Gohan, that when it came into play, you would choose a battle card in rest mode and KO it. So, very easy way to get rid of opponent's battle card, and it just had to be in rest mode, so it didn't care how high the energy cost was or the battle power. And then we had Super Saiyan Blue Son Goku at the Apex, who was your other 5-drop. If you didn't want to go the route of the Super Saiyan 4 Goku and go for the triple strike damage, then you could go for at the Apex, which was a much safer play because he did have barrier. He only had double strike, so he couldn't do as much damage, but he also had the auto that allowed you to KO an opponent's battle card when he came into play if your leader was Goku's lineage. So they both had their benefits. Me personally, I liked being cheeky with the grade 8 combo into the Super Saiyan 4. But if I'm being honest, I feel like this might be the better play just because, again, he has barrier, he gets KO battle card, and it's just a safer play overall to be able to protect your own battle cards. The other starter deck added more pickles to the pot with a Piccolo starter deck. Gave us arguably, in a way, a better Piccolo leader than the one we got in the set, just depending on how you wanted your leader to function. I feel like this one gave you a little bit more, while the other one did give you crit, and you could increase the crit damage with the Special Beam Cannon extra card. This leader gave you a lot more control of your opponent's side of the board. As with the Goku starter deck leader, he had the Set 3 syndrome, but on the Awakened side, for 1 green energy, once per turn, you could choose an opponent's battle card, 5 or less, and KO it, and then give your leader an additional 5,000 power. So he was a Piccolo Jr. leader, still Piccolo, of course, still Namekian. He just didn't have like the universe trait like the original Piccolo leader did. Obviously, he wouldn't need it, of course. But I feel like this leader just gave a lot more flexibility to the deck. It gave you a lot more options of what you could do, and honestly, it kind of reminded me of running the Cell leader in Union Force, because you could just KO a battle card at any time. You'd only do it once, as with the Cell leader. Now, where Cell's Awakened side could KO anything, the Piccolo Jr. can only KO 5 or less, but even so, to be able to KO anything 5 or less for 1 energy, like, why wouldn't you, if you had the option to keep stuff off their board, and to be able to pave the way for you to be able to do your damage? It was a great leader, and I thoroughly enjoyed using this leader. The boss card with the deck, though, didn't really seem to fit any particular theme. It went along with the theme of the actual Piccolo Jr. leader. However, there wasn't an archetype for King Piccolo. We did get a little bit of King Piccolo-esque support in set 4, like you had a couple of his minions that were just kind of garbage filler cards, and then we did get the 5-drop from the set. And while this one was a little bit better, he did have double strike, And he had Bond 3 as long as the others were Namekians. When you played him, you could choose up to one of your opponent's battle cards, energy cost 5 or less, and KO it. And with that Bond 3, you also got to reduce the energy cost of him in your hand by 2. So you could play him for 3 energy. 3 energy, double strike 25,000 was not bad at all, especially when you could KO a battle card when he comes into play as well. So while he didn't really bring anything to the table Namekian-wise, he did have a Bond ability that took advantage of you having a plethora of Namekians, which, again, I liked the card, and I did use it. It was better than the King Piccolo card we got in the set, both effect-wise and the art. I love this art much better. But I would rather us get like an actual archetype that kind of supported King Piccolo. We have gotten a few more King Piccolo cards in the game, but they're red and gross, and they don't do anything to support any kind of pseudo-archetype for the deck at all. With set 4, we also got another great BCC promo, Preface of Recovery Son Goku. It had Barrier, and when you played him, you got to choose 2 of your energy and switch him to active mode. Worked really well for Vegito decks, because you could play him for... Basically, you were playing him for 1 energy, and he had Barrier, so he was probably going to stick around long enough for you to be able to Union Patara him, either on that same turn or the next turn. But he became easily abused with the Shugesh super combo, because you would be able to super combo, gain your 10,000, play him for free, and then untap 2 of your energy. And it was a wild combination because it worked. Because Shugesh didn't care as long as it was, 3-drop or less? And so you were able to play this for free and get 2 free energy, either for comboing or for negates, and just a wild card. Or if you did it on your turn, to be able to further your own plays. Absolutely busted combo. I never really used it myself, because more or less, if I was playing Shugesh, I was playing my Great Apes, and I was getting out the King Vegeta to be able to evolve into the Great Ape. But nonetheless, fantastic promo card that ended up actually getting its own event promo and getting a foil variant, so that was pretty cool. Set 4 also had some of the coolest Dash Pack promos that we had in a while. Easily my favorite was the Desperate Onslaught Bardock, which not only was just a great card in general, but it gave us a new Xeno Bardock. It didn't cost any energy to play. It had a great ability that was actually worth playing, and that gave you more incentive to be able to run the Super Saiyan 3 Xeno Bardock. Being able to have critical and be able to be immune to blocker was pretty great for it. Then we had the Ultimate Form Son Goku, where if you're at 3 or less life, he was able to reduce his energy by 1, so he'd be a 4 cost, so would kind of help you out with your with your swap engine a little bit, although he didn't have swap, so he didn't go any further than that. He did have double strike, and when you played him, you get to KO a card, and if it was in rest mode, you get to draw a card, so not a bad card for the swap engine, but because it didn't actually further the swap chain, it wasn't really a super strong card for the archetype either. Then we had Desperate Odds Kefla, who was another one of those red cards that kind of, you got their ability based on if you had 4 or less cards in your hand. Not a strong kind of strategy. Not unless there was hand destruction involved as well, because you just weren't going to be able to keep your opponent from having a butt ton of card advantage while you're sitting there with 4 measly cards in your hand. And then lastly, we had Piccolo Jr. Driven to Fight. He was basically the same as the Nail from this set. The only difference being that he had Barrier, so he was still a 2-drop. You still got to play him off of Planet Namek, and you still got to draw a card when he attacked. So definitely a good card for the Namekian deck. Probably I would say the second best Dash Pack promo we got. The first, of course, being the Desperate Onslaught Bardock. Then we had some great cards in the tournament pack for set 4 as well. One of the best ones being Burst Attack Son Gohan, who also said if you had 4 or less cards in your hand, you got to draw 2 cards. He was a 3-drop, 15k critical. He had the Universe 7 tag as well, so it was a lot of support for this card and for different decks that you could play him in as well. Obviously, red aggro being the most prominent with the Pan Leader, because that made him a 20,000 critical, and being able to get that extra draw too, it's a weird strategy, but if you can make it work, I feel like it would be just an awesome kind of pseudo archetype to play. Then we had the freaking Merciful Minosha, just really not a good card. When you played him, if you had 4 more energy, you could choose an opponent's battle card and return it to its hand. Like, just really just a bad card. It didn't support the the Hirudegarn archetype at all that he went with, and just one of the least desired, if not the least desired card out of the entire tournament pack. Then with green, we got more Namekian support with King Piccolo, Demon Lord, and then Ribrianne Transformation Complete. The King Piccolo wasn't terrible. He had Bond 2, and you got to choose up to one of your other battle cards and give it plus 5,000 power. So, not terrible, but really not any reason to play him either. Now, if he was a 2-cost, and you could play him with Planet Namek, it would have been perfect. But again, unless they gave us like an actual King Piccolo archetype, this card just wasn't really that great. But it was, for me, because it was King Piccolo, it was much more desired than Minosha or the Dispo. And then, of course, we had the Ribrianne, who was an EX Evolve on the 5-drop Ribrianne from the Tournament of Power set. She also had Double Strike, and when you played her with Evolve, you got to switch it back to active mode. So you got to attack with it, make your opponent discard 2, evolve it, switch it back to active, and attack and make your opponent discard 2 more cards. Absolutely disgusting. I hated that deck. I hated when this card was announced, and it was literally the first promo I ever pulled from a tournament, and I was so mad. I ended up trading it right away to a buddy of mine, but I hated the card. Then for yellow, we had Source of Power Son Goku, and Infinite Alertness Dispo. Now, the Goku wasn't too terrible. When he attacked, you got two cards in your life, add them to your hand, and then he could gain plus 5,000 power and switch to active mode. So he kind of helped you awaken. He was kind of similar to the Tapion that we got in this set, but it just, I don't know. I didn't personally care for it. Like, the art was amazing, especially in the foil version. And it did have Goku's lineage, so you could play it with the swap engine, but I personally never did. Again, if it wasn't something that continued the swap chain, I didn't really find it as useful. Then Dispo, on the other hand, was just Universe 11, but it didn't do anything to help Universe 11, really. I mean, he was a 20k blocker, and if you had 4 or more Universe 11 in your drop, you reduce him by 2. So it became a 2-drop, 20k blocker, and you got to switch from the active mode at the end, so he could attack, but it's like, it didn't really help the archetype as much as the archetype actually needed. Like, the archetype needed stuff to be able to get on the board faster, and while this did give you a blocker to kind of defend some of the others, it just, I don't know. It was literally, for me, the second least desired card in the entire tournament pack set, second only to Minosha. Then, in my opinion, these were the 2 best cards next to the Gohan out of the Tournament Pack 4 set. We had Dark Temptation Toa, and then Supreme Kai of Time, Light's Guide. The Toa, you would play it for Overwhelm 3, just like you would the Supreme Kai. But the Toa, you had to have a green or yellow leader, and you had to choose your leader card and gain 5,000 power, and your opponent had to choose a card in their hand and discard it. Fantastic card to run with Cell. Absolutely, hands down. I ran 4 of these with Cell, plus the 4 Android 16 super combos, and then Cell itself. You would rip your opponent's hand to shreds with this card. Plus, Toa just seemed like a really cool character for, a Xenoverse character that I didn't really get too acquainted with. And then the Supreme Kai of Time, she worked with the other colors, being red and blue. She gave the leader the 5,000 power, but instead of making your opponent do anything, she allowed you to draw an extra card. So, again, not a terrible card at all. I personally like the Toa a little bit better, but that's because the discard effect was much more useful for the green decks that I played, whereas the Supreme Kai, I didn't play a whole lot of red, and when I did, it was usually Vegito, so it didn't really do much for blue either. I would rather just play stuff like the Time Patrol Trunks or the Mass Saiyan. Otherwise, it was still a fantastic card, definitely seen in a lot, if not majority of the Pan decks, because it was another card that gave your Pan leader a power boost and allowed her to do some extra damage, especially combined with the Fearless Pan Super Rare. And that wraps up the history of the Colossal Warfare set. Honestly, this was one of my favorite sets just because the Lineage set archetype was just so fun to play. Namekians were fun too. I personally didn't enjoy it, but people used Hirudegarn at least, or they used the support for Hirudegarn. Red had the baby stuff, which is a lot of fun to play, and of course, we had all the extra red support to go along and help the Pan deck as well. Personally, again, one of my favorite sets, and I think it really kind of defined how how the competitive environment was. There was a lot of people playing the same stuff, though, unfortunately. And we did see, a lot of rogue players still, people playing Pan, or people playing... some people playing actually legitimate Goku lineage. For the most part, though, it seemed like a lot of people were playing that blue-yellow crap. And that was easily one of the most boring decks to ever play against, because it was the same shit, and the games just took too long. I will say, though, as for that blue-yellow crap, the deck I found that had the best chance that I played against that deck, and that I rarely ever lost with it, was my pure Android deck. Android 17 leader, all Android 17-18 battle cards, no cell chain, generic good green support, especially with the Deadly Defenders didn't come out until Set 5, but when you had the Android 17 blocker from Tournament of Power, and then we ended up getting the Android 17 from the Ultimate Box as well, and it just gave a lot of good Android support. And then we already had the crit attackers. It just, for some reason, even though that deck swarmed so much, to be able to have those blockers, especially with the additional power boost that the leader gave, all those little weenies in the blue-yellow crap just couldn't get past it. And I would say I had a 95% win ratio against that deck with pure androids. Of course, a lot of people aren't going to believe it, or they're going to say the people I played against played it wrong. But I've got a lot of skilled people in my area. One of them has just recently topped an event, and topped a couple events as far as I'm aware. So I've got some good players in my area, and honestly, I feel like the pure Android deck stood a legitimate chance against it. And plus, Androids was my go-to deck when I was unsure what else to play, or I just wanted to play something I knew was going to do well. Androids has always stood by me. So, but this isn't about Androids. This is not about my love for Android 17. But with that, let me know what you guys thought about Set 4. What was your favorite archetype? Did you actually play anything that wasn't the blue-yellow shit? Let me know in the comments below. And with that, we're going to go ahead and get the frig out of here, and we will see you guys in the next episode.